Hello, this will be a hopefully brief overview of the categorical imperative from Kant's Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals. And mostly I'm going to try to just say what the categorical imperative is here according to these pre-prepared notes and not make references to the text and not comment much on the notes. Mostly I think it's best if I just read them to you. The detailed studying of the text can continue in subsequent videos in this series. The categorical imperative is Kant's strategy for knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's a strategy for helping us make moral decisions, and I will make at least one reference to the text. There's that passage where he says, you can be, however inexperienced in the ways of the world, however confused about particular circumstances and about what sort of course of action is likely to lead to what sort of outcome, and you can still be fully confident of the morality of your actions, of knowing what is the right thing to do if you're following the categorical imperative. Categorical imperative is a strategy for making moral decisions. There is only one categorical imperative. Kant will give us three versions of it, and they all mean the same thing. At least that's what he says. And I think it's best to think of them as meaning the same thing. But if that's hard to think through, at least think through how version 1 entails version 2 and vice versa. Versions 1 and 3 entail each other. Versions 2 and 3 entail each other. Kant gives us the categorical imperative, and they all mean this. The different versions of it all mean the same thing, and there's only one categorical imperative. But it might be easier to understand if you look at them and think, that doesn't even sound remotely like it means the same thing. At least understand that one includes or entails the other. Each entails all three. Meaning if one is true, all three are true. Maybe I better scroll down to look at them before we go over any of these notes here. No, let's not scroll down. Let me just say it orally. Version 1 says, act only in ways that can be universalized. Act only according to principles, or justify your actions only with principles that can be universalized. Version 2 says, treat other people as ends in themselves. Actually, all people, not just you. Treat all people as ends in themselves, as having their own inherent value, dignity, worth. And version 3 says, act as if you are making universal laws that everyone will have to follow in the future. So here's just an example of how some of that entailment works, which may help some of us understand how there's really just one version of the categorical imperative. Say I reduce other people to the status of being mere means to my own ends. I'm just treating people as ways of achieving my own goal. That means violating version 2. But that also means I'm acting towards them in a way which I would not want them to act towards me. I'm violating the golden rule, in fact. That means my behavior in this situation cannot be justified by universalizable principles. So I'm violating version 1 of the categorical imperative. Therefore, version 1 includes version 2. Anytime you violate version 2, you're also violating version 1 of the categorical imperative. So version 1 entails version 2. If I'm if I'm keeping version 1 of the categorical imperative, let's not go through the logic there. Let's just move that logic out. My brain's not in the right position for Modus Tollens' argument. If I am treating other people as mere means to the status of my own ends, I'm using them in a way I would not want other people to use me, which means my actions are not following principles that I can wish would be universalizable. And that means that every time I violate version 2 of the categorical imperative, also violating version 1. Oh, hang on. What about the time when I'm using myself as a means to an end? I'm reducing myself as a means to the end of achieving something. For example, suicide, or at least suicide for selfish reasons. Set aside complicated questions about Captain America jumping on a grenade in Captain America film 1 and all those other things, and set aside the whole discussion of what they call the principle of double effect. Suicide for simple selfish reasons, all right? That's a violation of categorical imperative version 2. What does that mean? Well, it means I'm treating myself as a mere means to some end. Well, could you wish that everyone would treat themselves as mere means to an end? Can you wish that everyone would treat anyone as mere means to an end. No, you really can't. It's not a universalizable rule. So here's a commentary on something that happens in Kant. People say things like Kant is too rigid. We have to allow exceptions to the rules. Well, when people say that, I say, yeah, I know. And yeah, Kant knows. We do need exceptions to many rules. Kant knows that. What has no exceptions is moral law. What has no exceptions is categorical imperative. Not every rule, not every rule needs exceptions. And certainly not every rule has no exceptions, even according to Kant. What has no exceptions is moral law and categorical imperative. Also, any principle for action, Kant keeps using the word maxim, any principle you justify your actions on that survives the test of categorical imperative version 1, meaning it can be universalized, is a principle that is universal and has no exceptions. But many rules have exceptions. The needed exceptions are actually going to be written into those universalizable principles, I think. We just need to make our justifications specific enough. We need to look at them closely. Perhaps more on that another time, but certainly not right now. Kant, I think, does a wonderful job explaining the nature of moral law and its requirements. Now, as far as I can tell, Kant actually doesn't give us any reason to think there is such a thing as moral law. In fact, his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, would seem to mean we can't ever know that there is such a thing as moral law. Moral law does involve things like having a non-physical soul and having free will, and consistently following moral law does actually involve things like believing in God and in life after death. But Kant is very skeptical of the possibility of giving good proof of God, free will, life after death, immaterial soul. But he does argue that we should believe in these things. That's part of the explanation. Another part of the explanation, and let me interrupt myself to say, I don't think he does a good job giving us a reason to think there is such a thing as moral law. All his moral philosophy is based on the idea of moral law, and I don't think he ever gives us a reason to say there is moral law. But he does do an amazing job, a brilliant job, a better job than anyone probably in human history has ever done, besides him, explaining the nature of moral law and its requirements. And part of the explanation does involve saying why we should believe in these things, God, free will, life after death, without proving that they're there. In Kant, we find this interesting distinction between arguing that a thing is true and therefore you should believe it, and just arguing that you should believe it without arguing that it's true. It comes up in other people, William James, Blaise Pascal. And another part of the explanation of moral law, without giving us a reason to think there is such a thing, is when Kant explains how it may appear that we do not have free will, but it's at least possible that we have free will because maybe we have non-physical souls, etc. This is in the third section of the grounding for the metaphysics of morals, as I recall. And there are other things, he says, that help to make sense of moral law without giving us a reason to think there is such a thing. Defense of the possibility of free will. Well, I guess I just mentioned that. So the other thing I need to mention is if human beings are ends in themselves or have their own inherent value, dignity, worth, that explains the categorical imperative. And connected to this is this brilliant observation from Kant. He points out that you already believe in moral law. Everyone who doubts moral law actually believes in moral law, except what we do is we believe in moral law with respect to ourselves. If we're consistent, if we pay attention to ourselves, we already believe that we ourselves are ends in ourselves. We ourselves are beings with inherent dignity and worth, deserving of respect. And when people mistreat us, we are reminded that we believe this if we pay attention to our reaction. When people mistreat us, we think someone's done something wrong. Our rights have been violated. Our people have violated moral laws that require that we should be treated properly. When someone mistreats me, I react with anger, and I think there's been some injustice because I should be treated better. I think there's a moral law that someone else has broken. And the Kantian message is, you're right when you think that. So now be consistent and recognize there is no reason you can possibly think of that moral law exists with respect to you, but not with respect to other people. Moral law protects you. Moral law tells you you should be treated properly. You should be treated with respect. Your inherent value, dignity, worth as a human being should be honored by other people. And that is why you should do the same to them. Once again, whether we pay attention to it or not, Kant is one of the great golden rule philosophers. Now, this was just some comments reviewing or overviewing the categorical imperative. Let's do this somewhat more systematic overview. What are the different versions of the categorical imperative, and some different subversions if you want to think of it that way? First, there's the version that's sometimes called the universalizability formulation. Always act in such a way that you could wish everyone else would act the same way. Or always justify your actions with justifications, or act according to reasons or principles. Kant uses the word maxim here, that it would make sense for everyone to use, or more precisely that that you could wish that other people would also follow all the time. Actually, everyone, not just other people, but you in the future. Moral law is universal, and that means that actions consistent with moral law are enacting principles that can be universalized. Now, there's a more formal version of categorical imperative version 1B, if that helps you think through these things. Always justify your actions with maxims, justifications that you could wish would become laws of nature. And maybe it's a little simplistic to, or a little misleading to refer to this as laws of physics, but I'm going to keep it. A lot of what I'm saying in this video is a model, an introductory model, or slightly more than introductory model, but not super advanced for thinking through Kant. And my advice is you take it until you learn better. Where's that line even from? I think it's modeled after a movie based on a book I still haven't read, Starship Troopers. Yeah, I recommend you use this model until you learn a better one. But you may learn a better one if you encounter a better Kant scholar, or if you become one yourself. Good luck. It's awesome. Someone needs to do it. And it's not a dirty job. It's a wonderful job. So always justify your actions with justifications that you could wish would become laws of physics, which everyone would necessarily obey. And then here's the thought experiment style of working through version 1, which is a fairly good, simple paraphrase of it. Just imagine a world where everyone makes the same kind of decision you do, or the same decision you are thinking about making, because the categorical imperative is a strategy for helping us make moral decisions. And Kant is always focusing on situations where you have some sense of what is the right thing to do, but you're tempted to do something that's not right and that is selfish. You're tempted to prefer your own happiness, or at least your own short-term happiness, or what looks to you like your own short-term happiness, to the requirements of morality. So imagine a world where everyone makes the same decision you're tempted to make. Is it a bad world? Then make a better decision. That's version 1 of the categorical imperative. Version 2, the humanity formulation, as it's sometimes called, simply always treat human beings as ends in themselves. And sometimes he says, always treat rational beings as ends in themselves. And it's essentially the same thing practically. Now, you can illustrate the difference with sci-fi, if Wookiees or Vulcans existed, or illustrate the difference with theology, if angels exist. If there are gods, then as rational beings, angels, gods, and extraterrestrials, assuming they're rational extraterrestrials. I don't know about those monsters from the Alien movies, but maybe they're rational. I don't know. But Wookiees and Vulcans, at least. Or, Groot. Groot is a good example. Wookiees and Vulcans and Groot. People like that are rational beings, and they also have to obey moral law. And you also have to treat them as ends in themselves. Now, practically, it doesn't seem to make much of a difference, because the rational beings we know about that we interact with on a daily basis include just human beings, including yourself and others. As for the angels, well, there may be more than one way to treat an angel properly. And if you want to know about that, I would suggest read a whole lot of Augustine and a whole lot of Thomas Aquinas. Start with the City of God and Augustine and see if you can come up with anything. In the short term, I assure you, and this is a good piece of theology, and maybe it's not philosophy, but I'm sure it's good theology. I can guarantee If you're treating human beings properly, the angels will be pleased with that. So one simple kindness you can do to the angels is just to treat humans properly. So again, I'm not sure if it makes a difference, but it does make a difference in how we understand moral law, because moral law is not there because of humanity as such. Moral law is there because of rational beings. It's because we are rational beings that moral law applies to us, not because of humanity as such. This helps to clarify the difference between Aristotle's ethics and Kant's ethics, because Aristotle's ethics is for human beings as such, is for the proper functioning and the happiness that follows on proper functioning of a human being. And Kant is about moral law that is an authority over all rational beings, not humans as such. Version 3 of the categorical imperative. And sometimes it's called the autonomy formulation or the kingdom of ends formulation. And one of the smallest mistakes you could make in Kant is to think that when he gives this autonomy stuff, he's giving version 3, and then when he gives kingdom of ends stuff, he's giving version 4. But I think if you study the text, you'll probably find these are just different ways of stating version 3. And again, if it helps sort through these things, call them version 3a and version 3b. Act as if you are making laws for all people will have to follow in the future. Or act as if the justifications for your action, maxims, again, are going to be in future laws that everyone must follow. And a closely related description, act in such a way as to bring about the kingdom of ends. And now that I've said something about the kingdom of ends, I'm going to put that off for another time. What is the kingdom of ends? It's just an overview. You could do a short version, Google it, less short version, pull up an online edition, or find your hard copy of The Grounding for the Metaphysics of Morals, or Groundwork of a Metaphysics of Morals, as some translations might render the title, and see what he says about kingdom of ends there. Or slower version, wait for me to get to it in the series in future weeks. All right, that's quite enough of an overview of the categorical imperative. Thank you for watching.